include the largest ever rollout of live facial recognition technologies across England and Wales. We know this approach works.
If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Our live shows are also on X, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Kick, and Twitch. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.
For The World Today, this is James O'Neill. Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer told Chinese President Xi Jinping that he wants the UK to develop a sophisticated relationship with China during talks in Beijing, the first such visit by a British leader since 2018. Starmer said the three-day trip aimed to improve economic ties while managing security concerns. Xi called for a new chapter in relations and deeper dialogue. Starmer said discussions produced concrete outcomes, including progress on whiskey tariffs, visa-free travel, and cooperation on irregular migration. He emphasized that strengthening trade links with China was intended to benefit the UK economy and lower living costs. Spain's socialist government plans to grant residency permits to more than 500,000 illegal migrants under an amnesty agreement with the far-left Podemos party, according to Madrid's ABC newspaper. Migrants would need to prove they were in Spain before December 31, 2025, lack a criminal record, and show at least 5 months residence prior to applying. The program, running until June 30th, will be enacted by royal decree without parliamentary approval. It would mark Spain's first major amnesty since 2005. Supporters frame the move as expanding rights, while critics warn it could encourage further illegal migration. German authorities have offered a €1 million reward for information on a suspected left-wing extremist sabotage attack that cut power to parts of Berlin earlier this month, leaving about 45,000 households and thousands of businesses without electricity for days. Rail services and hospitals were affected, marking the city's longest blackout since World War II. Despite Germany's extensive security apparatus, officials say they remain largely in the dark about the perpetrators. Interior Minister Alexander Dobrindt said left-wing terrorism has returned and acknowledged the state needs to catch up in combating it. Germany plans to boost intelligence resources and harden critical infrastructure against future attacks. Leaders of the Alberta Prosperity Project, a group advocating independence for Canada's oil-rich province of Alberta, have met U.S. officials linked to President Trump's administration at least 3 times since April, according to the Financial Times. U.S. officials described the meetings as routine civic engagements and denied backing separatism. The group is gathering signatures to trigger an independence referendum and has until May to meet the required threshold. Supporters say the U.S. would welcome an independent Alberta, while critics allege foreign interference in the campaign. The issue arises amid rising U.S.-Canada tensions and debates over sovereignty and globalism. UK Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer previously worked pro bono with disgraced solicitor Phil Shiner on a human rights case that later led to years of investigations into British soldiers over alleged war crimes, according to the Daily Telegraph. The 2007 Alskine case helped trigger prolonged legal scrutiny of troops, despite many accusations later being dismissed. Shiner was struck off in 2017 and convicted of legal aid fraud in 2024. Critics, including former Minister Johnny Mercer, said Starmer helped enable a witch hunt against soldiers. The government stressed Starmer represented intervening groups, not Iraqi families directly. Former British Army Colonel Hamish de Bretton Gordon.
Not civilian life. This is not policing. This is where people like Richie Cattrall put themselves in harm's way. And in this particular case, as you say, he was acquitted 3 times. And actually, it was agreed it was self-defense when an Iraqi potentially terrorist with an AK-47 came down the stairs. So, yeah, let's hope that the Prime Minister will right all these dreadful wrongs. Thank God Phil Shiner can no longer harm the military. But moving forwards, we need to sort this out because we need our military more than ever at this time.
We'll be back with another news break at the top of the next hour. This has been James O'Neill for The World Today.
Did you know they plan to build over 3,000 wind turbines on Queensland's Great Dividing Range? Over 3,700 kilometres of new haulage roads will carve through old growth forest. Destroying forests for industrial renewables makes no sense. It doesn't have to be this way. The intact biodiverse ranges of Queensland are no place for renewables. Take 2 minutes to learn the truth about the destruction they cause. Go to rainforestreserves.org.au.
There is a problem with medicine. and we can explain what it is by looking back to the discovery of penicillin. Penicillin, it turns out, was not just an accidental finding. Alexander Fleming discovered that mould he found in a culture dish was killing bacteria, but it took over 10 years before a team at Oxford University were able to isolate the active ingredient. They produced small quantities for preclinical and clinical trials, helping prove the compound was safe and could beat infection. However, they couldn't produce it at scale. In 1941, Andrew Jackson Moyer of the US Department of Agriculture, the forerunner to the FDA, suggested changes to the manufacturing process, enabling mass production. It turns out medicines are not invented when someone discovers a new molecular entity. They are the product of key stakeholders working together collaboratively. Until medicine can be manufactured at scale, it may as well not exist. And in 2025, this is a problem. In the 1980s, pharmaceutical companies began outsourcing production. Suddenly the system was significantly less integrated. Someone with a new discovery today will find themselves disconnected from the rest of the development and manufacturing process. Companies that develop medicine are still happy to work with big established pharma companies, but the modern day Flemings are cut out of the system. The result is far fewer new medicines coming to market. We want to fix this by ensuring the pharma industry builds a more integrated supply chain. We also believe that doctors' expertise administering medicine should be included at the beginning of the process. We know that doctors on the front line have insights about how to repurpose medicine. Doctors should be able to report their findings so that the necessary testing can be completed and they can share the results worldwide. Learn more here and help us take medicines back to the future.
With your help, we can continue to fight for freedom, reach new audiences, and bring important information to the public free of charge. This is not possible without your generosity. Join our quest for the truth and our freedom and donate today, telling it as it is. This is today's News Talk, The World Today.
Good afternoon if you're in Queensland, early evening. I suppose it's still afternoon in Victoria, New South Wales, and those heading towards 5 o'clock. And for those in the UK, a very good morning. The alarm says get up, so please do what the alarm says. No violence, please, and stop muttering under your breath. We need that. We need you to get up, be productive today, and then do damage tonight on your brain cells. Isn't that what we do? And I should talk about it to Alan Moran about that, see if the damage to the brain cells has occurred with the current government and Victorian government. I mean, Jacinta Allen is a drip. Now, I mention Alan because we talked to Alan Moran today about a problem most people know exists, but few believe can be rectified. We pay extraordinary prices for fresh produce grown in Australia in peak season. What about, after sort of diverting off here, I used to buy Subway. I thought Subway was a fair value 6-inch sandwich, or if you're a bit tight, you buy a 12-inch and cut it in half and give it to the missus. Well, what about the 6-inch one is like $13 or $14. Anyway, I'll get on to that too with Alan. A lot of things to talk about. Brain cells missing from government, the price of 6-inch Subways. You know, that's the Italian BMT, by the way. Now, it's not easy to take your business banking to a smaller player that might value your custom more. As for airlines, electricity providers, and telecommunications, there appears to be a competition. This appears to be, but that's all smoke and mirrors. Strangely, we end up paying the same prices and receiving poor customer service no matter where we go. They've mastered that. What do you want? We want your money, don't ask for service. So what can be done to alleviate the cost of monopolies? And why is it too hard for government to fix? Go back to what I said before, refer to what I said before, brain cells. Big night out, never came back after that. Dr Alan Moran is principal of, and he agrees with me too, he's principal of regulation economics. He is a noted economist who has analysed, written extensively from a market perspective. Alan was the director of the Deregulation Unit at the Institute of Public Affairs from 1996 into 2014. He was previously a senior official in Australia's Productivity Commission and director of the Commonwealth's Office of Regulation Review. Alan, thanks for joining me.
Hi, Mike. It sounds like 1896 to me, but you're right, it was.
Well, it's terrible. I mean, I might even do this. I was going to play it later. I can play it twice. I might play you a grab from Jacinta Allen. She is appalling. And you're in that beautiful place called Melbourne. So you are enjoying her commanding leadership style. What an idiot. Tell me, though, your views. If you were just to give a mark out of 10, say, we'll do 2 here, for the federal government and for the state government, what would you give them? Be nice, be kind.
I really don't think you can give very much to either of them. We have an appalling situation in terms of the governance in this state, probably the worst in Australia. And federally, we have just idiots running the government. They don't really know anything about governance, about the need to actually balance budgets, the damage that is done when you start taxing people too heavily, or having too many regulations. They just seem to think that they're in power to dole out the dough that's created automatically, and they don't seem to think have any conception that that money that's created is anything to do with them. They just think they're there to actually put it aside and give it to their friends and give it to people who vote for them, without such actions having any ability. So, out of 10, you'd have to give them, well, at least they're not shooting us. So you'd probably not like if you gave Iran 0, then you'd have to give them a lot more than that. But you'd be talking about 3 at the most, I think. If you're thinking, well, the best governments in the world are, Argentina nowadays, which would be 9 or 10. Some other governments, even socialist governments like Vietnam, which is very efficient government and is creating strong growth. China also got strong growth, although it's not a particularly palatable government for our tastes. But in terms of the ability to run, or the running of the economy, the federal government's terrible. The state government is worse, but at least they do have some belief in freedom, although they trust that to some degree with the various proposals on free speech. So but I think the only thing you can say is 3 for the feds and maybe 2 for Victoria.
You're very generous. I would hate to be at your school. I mean, I would have got -10. But I went shopping the other day and I was shocked. And my wife was shocked that I went shopping also. So there was a double shock there. But I popped into Woolies and then Coles, and I can see why. I mentioned Subway before. I mean, $13 or $14 for a 6-inch roll. You would normally think it's gone nuts, and it has gone nuts. But they must be paying a stack of bucks to provide the fresh ingredients, and they're very good quality. It's just that it's outrageously expensive. But I was looking when I went to Coles and Woolies. I was absolutely shocked at the cost of, because I grew up on the land. I mean, we actually grew cantaloupe or rockmelon, and I know how much they're worth and how much it costs to grow it. It's not a whole lot, but then the price gouging comes in and so forth. And even in South Australia, Drake's it has this magnificent fresh fruit, sort of a mini fruit and veg supermarket. Anyway, it was in this shopping centre. I can't think where it is now. I'll think of it later. They've been there for 20 years, and they were exited because Woolworths paid more, and so therefore they said, "No loyalty here. Goodbye." And they're going to push up the price. What can we do about this? Because and people say, "Oh, I wonder how families get on." That's the understatement. How do families get on? You can spend $100 and it looks like there's nothing in the shopping trolley.
Yeah, well, I think that's right. The prices have gone up. I think there's just, you can look at different aspects within the chain when it gets to you. I mean, and I'm not inclined to think that it's due to price gouging on the part of the retailer. That's not because I think the retailers are thoroughly decent people or whatever they are, but we do have quite a lot of competition. We've got, the duopoly of Coles and Woolies, but they've only got 60-something% of the grocery market. We've got Aldi and we've got Metcash and 7-Eleven, etc., with the rest of it. So, there is a lot of pressures on them to actually keep the costs down. And when you actually look at their profits, I mean, they make a profit of about 4 or 5% on the average cost of the inputs, of all their inputs, and that profit includes having to cover interest payments on capital and things like that. So it's not they're not making colossal money if they are price gouging. I don't think they can do that very effectively anyway. It's just that we have competition. If you look at American supermarkets or even British supermarkets, they make even less than the 4 or 5% that we make here. But they do have more competition, and I guess the more competition you have, the better. But there are limits to it in Australia because we are a relatively small market. So the costs have gone up, and they're continuing to go up. I'm not inclined to put too much of the blame on this on the supermarkets themselves, that's the retail chain. But the fact is that costs have gone up because we've allowed things to go up. We've got a lot of regulations. We just talked briefly about those before. A lot of regulations, and the labour costs have gone up. The labour costs are highly regulated. I was talking to somebody who was in the fishing business, and they catch shellfish, and they send the shellfish overseas, and they come back. So they send them overseas to be peeled and cleaned and blah, blah, blah. And then they come back to Australia because it's just too expensive to use Australian labour to do that sort of work. Partly because Australian labour is quite expensive anyway, but largely because the regulations are such that you can't, you basically got the rules under which people work are highly structured and ossified, so that the costs are very high. And you can see that down the chain. If we're talking about costs, our energy costs are among the highest in the world, more than double those of the United States, for example. And that's a cost imposed on us by the government. We've talked about this before. The government has insisted on us having these renewables and killing off coal, which is the cheapest form of energy, especially in Australia. It won't go to uranium or nuclear. So basically, we've got all those sorts of regulatory costs, labour costs, energy costs, and a whole lot of other costs associated with the farming area. A lot of farmers. I mean, you said you were your family was in the farming business, and many farms now basically are forced to actually undertake additional costs for environmental and for Aboriginal and for other reasons, all of which actually gets added onto the price at some stage. But the costs have gone up. Yeah, they've certainly gone up, and to see them going down further.
Because it is nuts. To me, farmers are making much money out of it, and they get the in between the farmer and the retailer. For example, Woolies or Coles. The prices, they take away all the other stuff. The prices are exorbitant, and you can't have people, who sometimes go through tough times, and everybody is starting to enjoy that now because things are getting slowly grimmer and grimmer. it still doesn't alleviate the problem that our produce is just way over the top, and Australia is a great big bloody country. It should have plenty of land to grow things, but you are right, the regulation and all the bits and pieces between the grower and the seller, it must be like this mechanism that's just well greased and well oiled. But being fair to them too, they're not making a whole lot of money too. They're just trying to exist. So we've got to somehow we have to look at it. We can't blame anyone in particular. But the fact is, it's just astronomical. By the way, Subway, I mentioned Subway before. They used to know me far too well, but Subway, they're a franchise, so they suffer at the hands of how much they're being charged generally. What about the airlines? I mean, in Australia, domestically, we've got 2.5 airlines. We've got Qantas, and then we have Virgin, and then we have Point 5, we have Rex. And their prices, I mean, Rex sometimes are a bit cheaper, but you're flying on a 30-year-old Saab generally now, because they gave back their 737s. So we have the two major airlines, Qantas and Virgin. They've also got to pay, huge wages. They've got to pay, they make big profits, but they have, hundreds, if not thousands, of flights per week. And so if the profit margin is just a little bit, look at, work on numbers. The numbers will say that if you have enough of those flying and you're making X amount, then you're going to make a big profit. And they always say, oh, Qantas is just raping and pillaging. No, they're just probably doing good business. But if you reduce their cost, well, not cost, if you reduce the cost of the ticket, then you'll probably find that Qantas will lose that margin, and they'll be also in trouble. What do we do?
Well, I think this is the reason why airline costs are high in Australia is there may be some gouging there because we really do have, as you mentioned, a duopoly. Really, there's only two airlines in there, so there is an ability where the duopoly to make a lot of money. How we actually alleviate this is difficult. I mean, you hope that maybe you'd allow other airlines to come in and contest the market, in which case we would see the prices fall somewhat. But the costs are actually built in. I mean, probably half the cost of running an airline, more than half, would be the labour costs. And the labour costs are high, not necessarily because the aircrew and other support services are overpaid, but they are involved in this dreadful system of arbitration that we have, which leads to very inflexible working conditions, that these have to be then factored into the cost of the ticket. Now, if we had a bonfire of some of these regulations specifying wages and overtime and time off and holiday pay and blah, 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 a whole lot of things like that. We had that, we would probably find that the cost would go down. And if there's sufficient competition, the prices would go down. Or if they didn't go down, then overseas firms would be attracted into the market, and the government would should allow them to contest the market. And the costs and the benefits would be passed on to the consumer. So we do have a situation of somewhat of a monopoly situation in airlines, which is leading to something like price gouging, or certainly over cost, but that's amplified very considerably by the regulatory arrangements, especially those over labour.
Let's talk about everybody's favourite subject, including our producers, banking. The banks are a great example of a massive royal commission. Whether they would have do any good, because they've got tentacles all over the place. But the banking, that's one industry we need to look at, isn't it?
Well, it's an industry which, what is it, about 4 of the top 20 firms in Australia are banks, maybe more than that, and that's quite an unusual situation worldwide, that the banks are so prominent in the wealth of the nation, the banks themselves, and we have a situation where they may be making more money than we want. We do have royal commissions or inquiries into the banks every sort of 10 or 15 years, and they've generally gone down the path of saying, well, let's have a bit more regulation, let's have a bit more competition from overseas, and we've seen that with some of the minor banks from overseas, and they've held the feet of the existing banks to the fire and have brought down costs somewhat. I think you might be right. Maybe we should have it is time to have a royal commission or some sort of commission into the banking system or the finance system generally, because banks ain't banks anymore. They're basically a whole lot of other things that they do. Basically, let's have a look at this and whether there are savings to be made by changing the regulations somewhat.
So what do we do? How do we? Because if it keeps going the way it's going, you don't have to be a very smart person to understand that, and the whole world's doing this. It's got to come to a crunch, and we have to avoid that crunch. So how do we actually do that? How do we say, let's reinvent the wheel almost?
Well, we basically, sometimes it takes a crisis. In terms of after World War II, we saw major reforms in Germany, in France, elsewhere, whereby the detritus of the regulations was thrown away because of defeat, and Japan especially, and those economies show this fantastic resurgence. We've seen it. We saw it to some degree in the UK and US in the 1980s, the Reagan and the Thatcher governments. They actually had a bonfire of the regulations. Tariff regulations came down, sort of labour regulations were relaxed. They sold off a lot of government entities which were very inefficiently run, and we saw a surge there. We saw a period of pretty strong growth around the world from about the 1980s till 10 or 15 years ago, including in Australia. Especially in Australia, we saw less regulations of mining, and we saw a lot of mining activity, and that's been the backbone of our resurgence of growth of the 30 years till about 2010. And basically, we hit a bit of a crisis then, and that forced governments to act. It seems as though governments seem to go on the same old way, expecting growth and creaming it off for themselves and creaming it off for their friends, all in the process while the economy kind of ossifies, and the regulations are built one on the other. The spending goes up. I mean, we're spending like 45% of GDP on government. Back 100 years ago, that would have been actually unthinkable. The economists 100 years ago would say that kind of money, no economy can persist for any length of time, and yet we do persist, but we persist and go downhill while we're persisting. And so, we need to actually have this bonfire of the regulations, have a real examination and searching out and sifting and reducing the expenditure levels of the economy, and allowing people with more of their own money and more of their own decision making, and that way we can be assured actually we will get stronger growth. To some degree, Trump is doing some of this, but a lot of people think it's kind of like a bit of a haphazard way he's doing it. But at least he's moved very quickly in the area which is a vital area for us, which is energy. He's totally deregulated the energy there. It's to hell with all these renewables and subsidies and things. He's just abandoned all those. He's gotten America out of the whole of the Paris Agreement, which is to actually substitute fossil fuels for renewables. Got them out of that. And there has been a resurgence of the U.S. economy, even in the year or so that he's been in office. And we've seen that written even larger in Argentina, which is an economy which has been on a downward spiral for 50, 60, 70 years. Suddenly, when Milei came in there and he said, I'm just going to take a chainsaw to all the regulations, everything, all the spending, people said that you're mad. It'll destroy the economy. Well, the economy is now growing at a very high tick, and what was 80 or 90% inflation is disappeared virtually. So it does take political courage to actually come in and do it. And I suppose for that political courage, you've got to have the electorate willing to actually accept that there will be pain for some people, but the outcome will be, if we allow markets to flourish, we allow people to buy and sell as they want, including their own labour, we will see far greater productivity, and higher productivity is the only way we can earn more money.
Yeah, I despair. I'm not going to go shopping again. That's what I'm not going to do. And I'll get a clip behind my ears. I'm just read this out to you. Starting on 1st of July 2026, Australia will ban supermarket price gouging by large retailers. That's over 30 billion annually, to prevent excessive pricing. Now, the ACCC found Coles and Woolies are highly profitable and face potential with fines up to $10 million, or 10% of turnover. Now, the new regulations, part of the Monetary Code, aim to protect consumers from, for example, shrinkflation and manipulated discount pricing, which we all see. Down, that commercial, it's all manipulated. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I think manipulated pricing, that's fair enough. I mean, you expect, they call it puffery in the advertising business, you expect a bit of that, saying mine is the best product, mine is the thing. That's kind of normal marketing. You expect all that. But if there is dishonesty, they're saying something is what it isn't, then I think that needs to be cracked down. But there's plenty of laws to do that already. It is dishonest. It is illegal to be dishonest. I don't know what they're going to find in June of next year, whether they're suddenly going to find that there's all this hanky-panky going on within the supermarkets, and that they're actually saying that they're offering products which they're not offering at prices which they're not offering. I doubt very much that it's the case. I mean, if it's the case, we would see massive profits on the part of the supermarkets. ACCC said that the profits are high. Well, they are quite high, but we're talking about 1 percentage point above the US or the UK levels. There's no golden pot of dough there which is going to resolve all the problems. There may be some irregularities, but I doubt that they're very significant.
Yeah, I think what we need to do is, we'll do it next time, we'll get into Jacinta Allen, your state premier. She is truly appalling. But, I'll bet you 10 cents that she'll get back in. There you are.
Well, she might. I mean, you're saying that because the Liberals are so poor, which they are. I mean, they just give these mundane messages. But it may just be that she's so on the nose that she fails to get in. Of course, then we have the massive transformation possible with One Nation, which is, nobody quite knows how that is going to pan out, but certainly it's going to make a major difference over the next year or so.
I think people will ask about One Nation. How will they handle Pauline Hanson being Prime Minister? Mm-hmm. Please explain. We haven't got time. But it's an interesting thought, isn't it? And it shows you how the whole topography of politics and people's opinions, and they're all changing. It's going in no direction. It's just like this mad snake, drunk snake all over the place. Dr. Alan Moran, if somebody wants to find out more about you or just talk to you, how do they do that?
Well, my website is Regulation Economics, one word, regulationeconomics.com. Most of the stuff that I write is lodged on there in the end, and I write in the Spectator, Quadrant, and various other magazines, and principally on energy and regulations generally. So I'm happy to discuss anything with anyone.
Absolutely brilliant. Thank you so much for your time. Nice chatting again. It's been a little while because we rejigged the format. Now we're rejigging it more. So all I do is work longer. Jen doesn't sleep. Look, thank you very much for your time. Have a great weekend. This is The World Today.
Our mission at Pets of the Homeless is really simple, and that's to keep vulnerable people and their pets together when they're going through a tough time. Back in 2015, Pets of the Homeless started with a 20-kilo bag of dog food, made it into small packs, put it in a suitcase, and it was just me walking down the streets of Melbourne. One woman on a mission to make a difference. I would share the story on social media.
We've just hit 100,000 meals distributed today.
And the community really responded positively, and it just grew from there.
My name is Kent, and this is Hippo. She's everything to me. She's such a good girl. I got her at a time when I wasn't very stable. I'd come out of prison, I was homeless, but as soon as I got her, I just realised, oh my God, I can't let this dog go. And she's just my best friend. Hippo had a canine equivalent of an ACL injury. I knew there was something really desperately wrong. It was agonising seeing her suffering. My caseworker put me in touch with Pets of the Homeless, and Yvonne said that they could help, and I was just so overjoyed. I wouldn't have been able to get through that medical incident without their help. Like, it just would have been impossible.
That bond between us and our pet is very important, and when someone is going through a really tough time in their life, that bond becomes even more important, and that's what we're trying to protect at Pets of the Homeless.
Who's that? Who's that?
My favourite quote is, I always wondered why somebody doesn't do something about that. Then I realised I was somebody. My intention wasn't to actually start a charity, it was to help. It was just putting one foot in front of another, and that's how we got to where we are today. We're now in a warehouse. We have about 150 volunteers. We provide on average about 60 to 70,000 meals every single month. We have a network of about 73 community partner organisations that we work with. We've also taken in hundreds of pets into our foster care program, and we've just reached 2.5 million meals distributed.
In the time that I've been volunteering with Pets of the Homeless, I've seen the community grow, numbers of volunteers, pet food packing, got a brand new van, and we can reach more community pantries and reach more people. The community, whether it's the volunteers who are packing the food, who are foster caring, they've got so much love to give.
I think Pets of the Homeless gives people hope. There can be a bit of judgment for people who are homeless and have a dog, but the reality is those dogs have got love and support, and it's so wonderful that Pets of the Homeless are able to help. It really makes a big difference in actual lives. It's really important work.
To the people who have supported Pets of the Homeless over the last 10 years, thank you from the bottom of my heart. There's so many kind people out there, and I'm just grateful for all of them. The work that we need to do is so huge and the need is growing, and we can't do it without the support of our community.
We're today's news talk, The World Today.
And welcome back to the World Today. I'm Mike Ryan. Nice to have your company. I was just talking about the cost of produce in Australia, the UK. Everyone's going through it. US not as much, but still things are just going up and up and up. Under Secretary of State Sarah Rogers said this week, with respect to speech, the UK has telegraphed authoritarian intentions. As she has announced, the US is drafting a bill to prevent enforcement of OFCOM decisions that clashed with the First Amendment. Building on the UK's 2023 Online Safety Act, which targets illegal and harmful content on platforms serving UK users. Now, such examples include Pornhub's upcoming UK access restrictions and past fights over sites like 4chan, where OFCOM overruled First Amendment arguments. Free speech supporters celebrated the move as a win against foreign regulatory overreach. But where, and I have to ask you, where is this heading? Kate Jones is a White House correspondent, journalist and author and historian. Kate is North American's editor of World Media UK USA, CYQ6 Core, and covers geopolitics, economics, technology and defence issues. Kate, thanks for joining me.
Sure, I'm glad to be here. And this is a very thorny issue we have.
It is. I mean, I always thought free speech was free speech, and anybody wants free speech changed, then they then believe in not free speech, just selective speech. What's your views on that?
So I think there are universal ideas. Most countries have a major issue with things like child pornography. And so if you start with that as your basis of a desire to have some kind of control, most countries have strict laws about this. And then in broadcasting, it becomes problematic because the internet is borderless. And how does one go about governing something that is outside of its jurisdiction? So this is probably the core issue, is the sovereignty issue, and I think that's what the undersecretary is saying, that the United States is a free speech society, and these laws, it's governing globally instead of inside its own borders. And so that's the idea behind the action.
Yeah, many in the UK, we talk to many in the UK, they're going to welcome the US intervention on this and other policies that the Starmer government has put in place or is trying to put in place. That would suggest, wouldn't it, that that all is not well at home?
It certainly does. And of course, there have been many issues cited, and we can go back to the vice president's speech, which I think was quite shocking for many Europeans. I think that was the Munich Security Conference speech on free speech. I do see this, certainly from the US perspective. We see this covered plenty on the news, where in Great Britain, people feel that their free speech rights have been infringed upon because they have been victims of government surveillance and being criticized for speaking out, and praying in public was one of the things cited by the undersecretary. I think you probably have a better handle on the full sentiment there, but it's a giant regulatory issue for everyone, including the providers of these platforms, because it's very hard for them to root out the most nefarious things when they have millions of users in things that are unregulated at the outset.
And the US itself, the Pam Bondi, who I hear that there's some rumblings within the Trump administration, so she's going along the same path as many others have gone. But she suggested just before Christmas in an interview that we must stop hate speech, and we will do that. Surely that's a First Amendment issue already. But for her to say that, she sort of seems to be getting lockstep with other countries, trying to protect those that need protecting. Australia, New Zealand, Canada, I suppose, the UK. But this gets down to just censorship. What can you tell me? Because the OFCOM are the ones that are going to be cutting off their what's it got, those things, and they're going to make sure that you adhere to the law, such as X. What's Ofcom's main you say, what are they trying to prevent?
I think in general, Ofcom probably had some very good intentions. Things like child pornography, things that incite violence. There are certainly categories that broadcasting is less desirable socially, or even influence campaigns, right? So foreign influence. So, you see that with TikTok in the United States. So I think maybe the intention's good, but the difficulty of policing this is problematic. And, the free speech laws in the United States are very clear and strict, and they allow you to say things that are really repugnant. And the idea behind that is we can survive the repugnant words, but we can't survive the loss of the ability to speak and the ability of the government to decide which words are repugnant. So that's the conceptual piece behind the free speech laws, that we have to put up with things that we don't love, things that we find really repulsive, for the purpose of allowing us to be free people. Not everyone has such a rigid landscape of laws. And when it comes to social media, it gets extremely complicated, because we previously were looking at things like broadcast law on the airways. And on the airways, there were different rules. So you could have watersheds, you could have requirements for news. Sorry, there's a siren in the background. So we had very, very different rules around that governed broadcast than social media. Social media does not, it fits under private communication rather than public communication. And so when you go from state to state, country to country, you're coming up against different laws and different legal frameworks around what is allowed.
Yeah, just a sidebar here, Your Honour. Chris Minns, who's our Premier in New South Wales, like a governor in the States, he has said categorically that the only speech you will have is what the government says you can say, that they will afford to you. That's the exact words. That alone, I mean, could you imagine someone trying to do that, say, in the US? I could imagine, though, that they could do that probably in the UK. Is there this polarisation between, say, one part of the West, UK, Australia, Canada, and the other part is the US, that still have their, they value free speech and other things, gun control and stuff. If you look at the countries I just mentioned, especially UK and Australia, they hate guns. And so as we go along, we tend to move away from the similarities that all countries had in the West. And if you look at Australia even, they're heading, and the UK, they're embracing China. And China has a terrible record on censorship and free speech.
Sure, and if you're using sort of Chinese platforms, you come up against their own sets of laws. We see that now, looking at China and the firing of the generals and who is broadcasting from where. And if you have a bureau in China, then the assumption is there's regulation. And then we had this sort of Wall Street Journal article with lots of question marks around that on this sort of nuclear secrets thing. So I mean, yes, you have these individual issues that come up with each country. I think the comments that you refer to about it, the speech that you have is what government will allow you. It's appalling. It's not Western. It's a shock and a surprise. So, and we do have some common roots here, going back very far into the concept that, our freedoms from government were to be protected so that we didn't go back in time to authoritarian states that made decisions about our welfare. We were instead voting and deciding amongst ourselves. And that was the concept of democracy, not to be ruled by, but to rule ourselves. And that free speech was the elemental piece of that. I mean, gun control, we can, you can go, it can vary from country to country, but I think across the Commonwealth, the idea of being able to speak out and speak up was a fundamental truth. Although what was codified becomes problematic later when governments want to restrict speech. And that's the core problem that we have now, is the why. Why does the government have a desire to restrict speech in each of these places? And the United States is not alone. Great Britain and Australia, they're not alone in this. The United States also has had restrictions, as you mentioned, things like hate speech, highly questionable. What the intent is behind something, how much does that matter in what is said? At the same time, we have laws that you can't yell fire in a theater. Certainly we have laws on manipulating images regarding children, or selling images regarding children. So we have core issues that we do struggle with and we've always addressed, but we have these new issues, which I think I have to ask why.
Yeah, it's quite interesting. In Australia, we had, I'm mentioning Australia, even though we're more UK, but we for this part. But the Australian government, they're going to have an investigation into X, and they said the reason is because we want to have an investigation into X. They've done nothing wrong, but we're going to investigate them. And in the UK, we see that the UK government, I mean, they would like X to fall into a volcano, wouldn't they? But here's the thing, the kicker, X is not a free speech platform because it's very, very selective, and we suffer at that particular fate because they don't like what we say. And that's, at the end of the day, it's Elon Musk company's X's business. It's because they're a private company, but they do preach that they are for free speech, and they are most definitely not for free speech, selective speech. But however, they have a right to do what they like because it is free speech. And even though they're on socials, so people say, oh, can be a bit flippant. They actually have a right to do that. And the people online have a right to say something, and the people also have a right to be heard. The thing that is disappointing with X is that you're not heard. When our numbers, it's incredible. If we ever get to 400, we had 13,300 with TNT radio, and it didn't move for 2 years. And then we cranked this up to see if we can get away from those algorithms. TNT radio is still there. So the algorithms say, according to Grok, that we are a tier 1. We're a very bad company. We're extreme because we have discussions like this. I went on a bit there, but X, they have a right. And for governments such as the UK government or the Australian government or other governments to say, we're going to go after you because we don't like what you say. What do you say to that?
So it's a little complicated, and you have to go back in time a bit and think about what broadcasting is. When in the United Kingdom, as an example, there used to be a set of channels on the airwaves, and then you had people like Sky News break out in satellite TV, and that was a giant battle. And you had, in the United States, you had cable. And the governance of a thing that is not broadcast over the airwaves changes. So, in fact, the social media platforms in the United States, the governance model for them is very, very different than the broadcast model. And so they don't have the same rules. They're actually protected because it's considered private speech. You sign on, you build your account, and you go into this private channel in which you broadcast in a way that seems quite public. But the way it is treated is different than something over an airwave, which is regulated. So that was the sort of starting model. What do you do with social media? And then, of course, it became giant and global, and you have algorithms that make decisions about whether or not your platform is going to be elevated. And, it's a private channel. So it's the same as you deciding you don't want to have someone call you, you're blocking them. So yes, it's problematic, it's unfair, it's all of those things, but this is the historic sort of framework that was around it.
The shift away from the US, and Donald does make some faux pas at times, but he is still the president of the USA, and he's done a fair bit of, said some fairly nice things at times, which can always change the same day or the same hour, but we see that Starmer is now cozying up to China and to just about everybody else that Donald Trump says don't. Do you think this will be a problem? Because here we have Starmer doing what he would like to do: stop free speech, make sure you can't march, you got to do blah blah. The whole list goes on, and yet you see the US under Trump. He may disappoint people in many ways, but he has always stood up for the right to have free speech. So do you see the move towards China being a problem for the US? And then you got Five Eyes and stuff like that. Look at the Chinese embassy; they're going to build the super embassy feet away, not even feet away, inches away from this high data. High-end data cable, which they can then siphon quite easily. And we look at the UK with one of the grassroots publications, UK Column. It has an enormous amount of Chinese stuff in it, which is very disappointing. But the Chinese propaganda is rolling on, especially with UK Column. But you see the whole thing in the UK at the moment. It is swinging away from traditional allies and setting up new markets, isn't it?
Certainly, it's problematic. The US view on China is very clear, and that comes out in the National Defense Strategy that the objective is to not end up in a war with China, but to agreeably get along. But there's a huge level of tension. There's a lot of discussion of IP theft. There's certainly plenty of animosity between the two countries. And recently, you saw the reaction to Carney in Canada's desire to allow the Chinese. I think they were building a port, or it was, well, tariffs was the response to that. I don't think the UK will suffer such a thing. I think Starmer gets away with it and gets to, maybe the embassy is built, maybe it's not, who knows, over time. It's been allowed. I think Starmer gets away with it by not saying too much and not agreeing to too much, at least in the short term. But certainly anyone who makes that decision that they want to side with China is going to have a rough ride under this current administration.
Oh, that's what I like. A cough just as I come into it. Hit the cough button. It's like terrible, but it's all live. I'm just thinking. How do you see the relationship then between the US and the UK, the US and China? How do you see that moving? If you look at the base or the values that China have, again, the censorship is very strong there. Yeah, it's the same in Russia, even though they say it's where a lot of dissidents go. They do give you a little more latitude, but at the end of the day, they don't want you criticising the government too much, which is probably a fair thing in one way. But where do you see the relationships heading towards these two countries or three countries and the rest of the West? Donald Trump, I suppose, is trying to keep the West together but make America even greater. But what that's doing is creating all sorts of problems on the international stage, isn't it? And it's going to create, I see, all sorts of problems arising from the moving away from traditional marketplaces to new ones.
So it's a really problematic issue. And even the United States for many years struggled with this with China. It was the cheap import of goods, right? And the temptation to do things and work with the Chinese is very high because, look, they're going to offer EV vehicles. They have technological capabilities. It comes at a very low price. They have the ability to offer materials. It's the same problem set as Russian fuel, right, for Europe. So the temptation's really high, and I think every country wants to sort of engage without harm, but once you start engaging, harm has a tendency to occur. Where in the United States, it was the loss of manufacturing, it was the loss of access to certain materials, and now the U.S. is turning around and attempting to reverse that and asking allies to do the same, because they see that this is a near peer or peer. In many cases, it's certainly a peer, and that threat is real. And as you say, the Chinese are very strict. They have social media. You have a score for your citizenry score and your behavior score, and then people are not allowed out. And the levels of restrictions are very, very high for such a large country and so many people. So I
Yeah.
think that in the future, yeah, that should be considered. Is your partner going to share your values? And as you share economy with them,
Mm,
will you find ways to create agreements? And then
mm,
what will you do with your other allies? And a lot of decisions have to be made by countries how they will align. Will
mm,
you align with China and away from the United States and away from some of your other Western partners? And what will that cost you and what is the benefit? And that's something
mm,
that has to be very carefully assessed. In terms of the special relationship, however, between the United States and the United Kingdom, I think it is very strong. I
mm,
believe that it is very strong and fundamental to the United States. The United Kingdom is the number one ally of the United States. Yes, Five Eyes, it's also special operations. These are groups that share and will bleed for each other on the battlefield and save each other's lives. There is a strong brotherhood, and there is common belief, common law, common idea, common history. And so I think that the United Kingdom, certainly also Australia, um, there are very, very strong ties, even Canada, and we're having teething troubles. I do believe that across the Commonwealth, the United States is very well aligned, but these are problems that will have to be worked out. The methodology of the Trump administration has been very uncomfortable for its allies. But the United States also, and the president has been very clear that it's an urgent situation and the world has changed.
Great conversation. Must do this more often. I'd like to be able to do it at a better time slot for you, but we can't. So thank you for staying up late for us. You're going to hang around for the protagonist, so thank you for that. We'll be back after the news break for the protagonist, and we'll be looking at some of the topics that we were discussing just before, all to do with the relationship between China and the UK.
This will include the largest ever rollout of live facial recognition technologies across England and Wales. We know this approach works.
If you missed your favorite show or interview, visit episodes on our website at theworldtoday.news. Our live shows are also on X, Facebook, YouTube, Rumble, Kick, and Twitch. Now there really is no reason to miss out on anything on theworldtoday.news.